In our last look at this turning point in history, we saw the terrifying reality of the 19th century hospital, where a blood-stained coat was a badge of honor and the air itself was thought to be the enemy. We watched as the discovery of microscopic life in a bottle of spoiled wine eventually led a few brave surgeons to start spraying carbolic acid over their patients, changing the odds of survival forever. But a single breakthrough in a single operating room is just a spark. To understand how that spark became a global revolution, we have to look past the famous names and the dramatic surgeries. We have to look at the quiet components that actually made germ theory work in the real world. Because for a long time, the biggest obstacle to saving lives was not a lack of knowledge, but a lack of infrastructure. Imagine a city in the middle of the 19th century. It is a place of incredible noise and constant movement. But beneath the surface, it is a place of deep, organic grime. There is no such thing as a disposable world yet. Everything is reused and everything is porous. If you go into a hospital in this era, you are entering a building that was likely never designed to be a place of healing. It might be an old converted mansion or a repurposed my house with wooden floors that have soaked up decades of fluids and heavy velvet curtains that trap every particle of dust. The beds are made of wood, and the mattresses are stuffed with straw or horsehair. In this environment, even the most brilliant doctor in the world is fighting a losing battle. Even if he believes in the invisible germs we discussed previously, his surroundings are working against him every second of the day. This was the hard constraint of the medical world. It was a logistics problem disguised as a scientific one. You could have the best antiseptic spray in the city, but if your bandages were made from the shredded leftovers of old linen shirts gathered from a local charity, then you were simply inviting the enemy back into the wound. The bottleneck was the material world itself. To make surgery safe, the medical community did not just need a new theory, they needed a new supply chain. They needed materials that could be cleaned or thrown away, and they needed a way to manufacture those materials on a scale that could serve millions of people. The key insight that changed everything was the realization that cleanliness was not a state of being, but a process. It was a system that had to be maintained through every step of a patient's journey. This led to a massive shift in how we looked at ordinary objects. Think about the simple bandage. For centuries, it was just a piece of cloth. But as the practice of antisepsis took hold, the bandage became a high-tech piece of equipment. People began to experiment with different ways to treat gauze with chemicals to ensure it stayed sterile from the factory to the bedside. This seems like a small detail, but it was a quiet revolution. It meant that a doctor in a remote village could provide the same level of safety as a surgeon in a major city, because they both had access to the same standardized tools. As this new way of thinking spread, it created a massive demand for industrial chemistry. We often think of the Industrial Revolution as a story of steam engines and iron rails, but it was also a story of vats and vials. The coal industry, which was powering the world with fuel, also produced a strange dark liquid called coal tar. For a long time, this was just waste, but chemists soon realized it was a goldmine of useful compounds, including the very acids needed to kill bacteria. Suddenly, the same industry that was turning the skies black with smoke was providing the tools to make the inside of the human body safe. This connection between heavy industry and delicate medicine is one of the great ironies of the era. The massive factories of the late 19th century were not just making steel for skyscrapers, they were churning out the chemicals that allowed mothers to survive childbirth and soldiers to survive their wounds. This scaling process changed the economics of health forever. In the old days, a hospital was a place of last resort for the poor, while the wealthy were treated at home. But as the systems of antisepsis became more complex, the hospital started to change. It became a specialized machine. You could not replicate the sterile environment of a modern operating room in a bedroom. You needed the tiled walls that could be scrubbed with harsh chemicals. You needed the metal tables that did not absorb bacteria. You needed the specialized staff who were trained to move through a room without touching anything that might carry a hidden threat. This is where we see the rise of the modern nurse as a professional guardian of the sterile field. They were the ones who managed the quiet components of the system, ensuring that the instruments were boiled and the linens were fresh. The ripple effects of this change were felt far beyond the hospital walls. Once the public began to understand that invisible things could kill them, their entire relationship with the world changed. This is when we see the birth of the modern bathroom, with its porcelain fixtures and easy-to-clean surfaces. We see the end of the heavy, dusty tapestries in homes and the rise of smooth, painted walls. The world became brighter and harder because hard surfaces are easier to disinfect. Even the way we handled food began to mirror the way we handled surgery. The canning industry and the dairy industry began to adopt these same principles of heat and chemical barriers to keep the invisible rot at bay. There were losers in this transition, of course. Many of the old ways of doing things were discarded, and many practitioners who could not adapt to the new rigid standards found themselves obsolete. The cost of medical care began to rise as the need for specialized equipment and manufactured supplies grew. But the trade-off was a world where a minor cut was no longer a potential death sentence, and where surgeons could finally reach into the torso to repair organs that had been off-limits for all of human history. The quiet components of soap and gauze and tile had effectively unlocked the human body. Today, we live in a world that is defined by these standards. We take it for granted that our milk is pasteurized and our bandages come in sterile plastic pouches. We do not think about the complex global network of chemical plants and shipping lanes that keep our hospitals stocked with disinfectants. But every time we wash our hands or walk into a clean, brightly lit room, we are participating in a system that was built brick by brick during those few decades of the 19th century. We have moved from a world of organic mystery to a world of managed risk, where we use the tools of industry to protect the fragility of life. The story of how we mastered our environment is usually told through the lens of great inventions, like the steam engine or the light bulb. But the quiet component of antisepsis reminds us that some of the most important technical advancements are the ones that happen in the background. It is the story of how we learned to see the small things and how we built a massive invisible infrastructure to keep them in check. It is a story of grit and persistence and the slow, steady application of logic to the messiness of the human condition. But while doctors were busy perfecting the art of keeping things clean in a single room, the rest of the world was struggling with a different kind of challenge. They were trying to figure out how to coordinate a planet that was suddenly moving much faster than a horse could carry a message. To understand the full picture of this era, we have to look at how information finally broke free from physical objects. Now, we take a quick step sideways in the story to see how humanity learned to coordinate over vast distances. The ability to send a message instantly was the missing context that allowed all these other advancements to synchronize across the globe. Join us in the next episode as we explore the race to build the telegraph and the birth of the long-distance coordination that changed the timeline of history. If you are enjoying this journey through the tech that built our world,